They called her a murderer, a black widow who poisoned her husband for gold and vanished into the countryside like a ghost fleeing judgment. For 5 years, Elara Whitmont's name was whispered only in scandal, until tonight, when she walked back into London's glittering halls as if she owned them. The room froze, and across the marble floor, Duke Rowan Ashford, untouchable, unmovable, shattered. One glance and 5 years of silence exploded between them. Love, betrayal, truth buried in lies. Society wanted her destroyed. He wanted her back. But neither could survive what came next, unless they burned it all down together. If you're ready for a story of defiance, love, and revenge that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last word, stay with me. And when this widow proves everyone wrong, drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Let's begin. The Grand Exhibition Hall of Kensington stood like a cathedral of power. All soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers dripping with light, and marble floors polished to mirrors. London's elite moved through it like sharks in silk and diamonds, circling, watching, waiting for blood. And tonight, they got it. Elara Whitmont stepped through the arched entrance at precisely 8 o'clock, and the world stopped breathing. She wore black. Not the mourning black of a grieving widow. No lace, no veil, no apology. This was black like midnight, like smoke, like a declaration of war. The gown hugged her frame with architectural precision, its neckline sharp as a blade, its train sweeping behind her like a shadow that refused to fade. Her dark hair was swept into a severe knot, her pale throat bare except for a single strand of pearls. Her mother's pearls, the ones she'd worn the night her life ended, the night her husband died. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Is that impossible? She wouldn't dare. 5 years, and she has the audacity. Heard she killed him, poison in his wine. Disappeared to some god-forsaken estate, probably hiding the evidence. Elara didn't flinch. She'd expected this, prepared for it, armored herself against it for 5 brutal years in the countryside, where the only sounds were wind through dead leaves and her own heartbeat reminding her she was still alive. She lifted her chin and walked. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. She didn't look left or right, didn't acknowledge the stares boring into her spine like knives. She moved through the crowd with the grace of someone who had nothing left to lose, which was precisely what made her dangerous. The exhibition was a showcase of archaeological treasures from Egypt. Gilded sarcophagi, ancient scrolls under glass, artifacts that whispered of empires risen and fallen. Fitting, Elara thought distantly. Empires always fell. Even hers had. She stopped before a display of carved stone tablets, pretending to read the placard. Her hands, gloved in black satin, didn't tremble. She wouldn't allow it. Lady Whitmont. The voice cut through the murmurs like ice through water. Sharp, feminine, lethal. Elara turned slowly. Lady Genevieve Harrington stood there, resplendent in cream and gold, her smile as warm as a viper's kiss. Behind her clustered a quartet of society's most vicious gossips, women who could destroy a reputation over tea and rebuild it over cards, depending on their mood. Lady Harrington, Elara's voice was velvet over stone. How lovely to see you. Is it? Genevieve's eyes glittered. I confess, I'm surprised to see you at all. After everything. The pause was deliberate, the implication clear. Elara smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Everything's is such a broad term. Perhaps you could be more specific? One of the other women, Lady Pembroke, a matron with a face like a pickled plum, gasped audibly. The nerve? I simply mean, Genevieve continued smoothly, that your return is unexpected. One wonders what could possibly bring you back to society after such a long absence. Translation. What makes you think we'll let you back in? Elara met her gaze without blinking. I grew tired of the countryside, Lady Harrington. The air is clearer here, and I've always preferred my enemies where I can see them. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Genevieve's smile turned brittle. How fascinating. And does your late husband's family know you've returned? I imagine they have opinions. I imagine they have many things. Elara replied coolly, opinions being the least interesting among them. Lady Pembroke clutched her fan like a weapon. Well, I never— No, Elara agreed pleasantly. I don't suppose you have. Before Genevieve could respond, a new presence cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Ladies? The voice was deep, controlled, and utterly unmistakable. Every woman turned, every spine straightened, because Duke Rowan Ashford didn't simply enter rooms, he commanded them. He stood 6 feet 3 inches of controlled power, his broad shoulders filling out formal black tailcoat with devastating precision. Dark hair swept back from a face carved from aristocratic bone and masculine beauty. Sharp jaw, straight nose, eyes the color of storm clouds over the Thames. At 32, he was the most eligible bachelor in England, the wealthiest peer under 40, and the man every mother with a marriageable daughter had thrown at his feet for the past decade. He'd rejected them all. And right now, he was looking at Elara like she was the only person in the room. No, like she was the only person in the world. Genevieve recovered first, her smile brightening with desperate hope. Your Grace, what a delight! We were just— Leaving, Rowan finished smoothly. His gaze never left Elara's face. Weren't you? It wasn't a question. Genevieve's mouth opened, closed. The calculation in her eyes was almost visible. Weigh the insult against the opportunity, measure the risk of defying a duke against the chance of catching his attention later. She chose retreat. Of course. Ladies, shall we view the scrolls? They scattered like pigeons before a hawk. And then there were two. Rowan and Elara. 5 feet of marble floor between them. 5 years of silence, lies, and unfinished sentences crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Elara felt the armor she'd built crack. Elara. Her name on his lips was reverence and accusation and prayer all at once. She swallowed hard, forced steel into her spine. Your Grace. Something flashed in his eyes, pain perhaps, or fury. Don't. Don't what? Don't pretend we're strangers. He took a step closer. Don't stand there in that damn dress looking like vengeance itself and call me Your Grace as if you didn't once. He stopped. Jaw clenched. The words died between them, too dangerous to speak aloud. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. That was a long time ago. 5 years, 3 months, and 16 days. His voice was rough. Not long enough to forget, not nearly long enough. The air between them was electric, dangerous. Around them, the exhibition continued, polite conversation, clinking glasses, the rustle of silk, and the murmur of gossip. But in their small orbit, the world had narrowed to just this. Two people who had once meant everything to each other, now standing on opposite sides of a chasm, neither knew how to cross. Why are you here? Rowan's question was low, urgent. Why now? Elara lifted her chin. I live in London. I have every right to attend public exhibitions. You know what I mean. He stepped closer again. Now only 3 feet separated them, close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood and bergamot, achingly familiar. You've been gone for 5 years. No letters, no word. And then you walk back in here as if what? Her voice sharpened. As if I don't owe anyone an explanation? Because I don't, Rowan. Not to them. She gestured toward the crowd. And not to you. The use of his given name landed like a physical blow. She saw it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. You disappeared, he said, each word precise and controlled. The night of the funeral, you vanished. No one knew where you'd gone. Your husband's family claimed you'd fled, that you were— He stopped, shook his head. I looked for you. For months, Stop. The word came out sharper than she intended. Just stop. Why? Now anger crept into his voice. Because it's inconvenient? Because it doesn't fit the narrative you've built? You think I don't know what they say about you, what they've been saying for 5 years? I know exactly what they say. Elara's voice was ice. They say I killed my husband for his money, that I poisoned him, or pushed him down the stairs, or drove him to madness. The stories vary depending on who's telling them. They say I'm a black widow, a murderer, a woman so desperate and depraved that I'd destroy an innocent man for inheritance. Her hands trembled now. She pressed them flat against her sides. And do you know what the truth is, Rowan? She stepped closer, close enough to see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. The truth is that I don't care what they say. Because the people who matter know what really happened, and the people who don't— She smiled, cold and sharp. They can go to hell. Rowan stared at her. For a moment, she saw the man he'd been 5 years ago. Younger, softer, before whatever had happened to him in the intervening years had carved these new hard lines into his face. Tell me, he said quietly. Tell me what really happened. No. Elara. I said no. She turned away, focusing on the stone tablet in front of her, as if it held the secrets of the universe. You don't get to demand answers from me. You don't get to show up here and act like you have some claim to my life, my choices, my truth. You gave up that right. I never had the chance to— You had every chance. The words burst out of her before she could stop them. She whirled back to face him, and now the armor was gone, stripped away, leaving only raw fury and pain. You had years, Rowan. Years before any of this happened. Years when you could have— She stopped, breathed, rebuilt the walls. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, detached. But you didn't. You made your choice. I made mine. And now here we are. Rowan looked like she'd struck him. My choice? What choice did I have? You were engaged to— Don't. The single word was a command. Don't speak his name. Not here. Not now. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The exhibition swirled around them, a glittering carousel of wealth and judgment and carefully constructed lies. They stood at its center like the eye of a hurricane, still, silent, devastating. Finally, Rowan spoke. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual aristocratic control. I never stopped looking for you. Elara closed her eyes, opened them. You should have. I couldn't. He took another step, and now they were close enough that if she reached out, she could touch him, could lay her palm against his chest and feel his heartbeat thundering beneath silk and muscle. Elara, Your Grace! The interruption came from a portly man in naval dress, his face flushed with wine and self-importance. Admiral something or other, Elara couldn't remember his name and didn't care to. Forgive the intrusion, the Admiral continued, clearly not sorry at all. But Lord Pembroke is asking for you. Something about the railway investments? Rowan didn't look away from Elara. Tell him I'm occupied. The Admiral's gaze flickered between them, calculation evident in his watery eyes. Of course, Your Grace. Though I must say— He turned to Elara with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lady Whitmont, what a surprise to see you. I'd heard you were living quite rustically these days. Had you? Elara's tone could have frozen the Thames. How thoughtful of you to keep track. Well, one hears things. He leaned in conspiratorially, wine breath washing over them. Terrible business about your husband. Tragic, really, though I suppose the inheritance softened the blow. The silence that followed was absolute. Rowan moved. Not much, just a shift of weight, a subtle realignment of his body between Elara and the Admiral. But the threat in it was unmistakable. Admiral Whitfield. Rowan's voice was soft, deadly. I believe you have somewhere else to be. The Admiral paled. I didn't mean— that is, I was merely— Now! It was a single word, but it carried the weight of generations of ducal authority. The Admiral fled. Elara exhaled slowly. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yes, Rowan replied. I did. She looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time since he'd approached, saw the tension in his jaw, the muscle ticking in his temple, the way his hands remained clenched at his sides, as if it took every ounce of his considerable control not to reach for her. This was a mistake, she said. Coming here. I should leave. Don't. His hand moved just an inch, just enough that his fingers nearly brushed her glove. Please, don't run from me again. I'm not running. She met his gaze steadily. I'm surviving. There's a difference. Then survive here. The words were urgent now, rough with something that might have been desperation. Let me help you. Whatever happened, whatever they're saying, you can't help me, Rowan. Elara stepped back, putting distance between them. Safe distance. You can't fix this with your title, or your money, or your protection. This isn't a problem you can solve. Then what is it? She smiled, and it was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. It's my life, and I've learned to live it alone. She turned to go. I'm not giving up on you. The words stopped her mid-step. She didn't turn around. Couldn't. If she looked at him now, she'd break. You should, she said softly. Everyone else has. And then she was moving, cutting through the crowd with the same controlled grace she'd used to enter. Whispers followed her like a wake, louder now, more vicious, because Rowan Ashford had spoken to her, had defended her, and that was fresh blood in shark-infested waters. She made it to the entrance hall before the first tears threatened. Made it outside into the cool London night before her hands started shaking. Made it to her waiting carriage, a hired hack because she'd sold everything else, before the armor finally, completely shattered. Where to, ma'am? The driver called down. Elara gave him the address of the modest townhouse she'd rented in an unfashionable corner of Bloomsbury. Not her old home. That had been sold to pay debts. Not her husband's estate. That had gone to his brother, along with the title and the fortune. Everything was gone. Everything except her mother's pearls and her father's books, and the truth that no one wanted to hear. The carriage lurched into motion. Through the window, she could see the exhibition hall blazing with light, hear the faint strains of a string quartet starting up inside. The party would continue for hours. By morning, her return would be the talk of every drawing room, every gentleman's club, every gossiping circle in London. They would tear her apart all over again. But this time, she was ready. She leaned her head against the worn velvet seat and closed her eyes, seeing Rowan's face in the darkness, the way he'd looked at her, the way he'd moved to protect her, the way 5 years of silence had shattered in a single glance. She'd forgotten how dangerous hope could be. Mum. Inside the exhibition hall, Rowan Ashford stood exactly where Elara had left him, staring at the empty space she'd occupied as if he could will her back into existence. Well, well, the voice belonged to his closest friend, Lord Marcus Thorne, who materialized at his elbow with 2 glasses of champagne and a knowing smirk. That was quite the display. The whole room is buzzing. Rowan didn't respond. Couldn't. His mind was still replaying the conversation, analyzing every word, every pause, every flicker of pain in Elara's dark eyes. Marcus handed him a glass. 5 years and she walks back in like she owns the place. I have to admire her nerve. Don't. Rowan's voice was granite. Don't what? Admire her? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Come now, Rowan. Even you have to admit it takes considerable courage to face down this den of vipers after what they've said about her. What they've lied about her. Rowan turned to face his friend, and Marcus actually took a step back at the fury in his eyes. Every word is a lie, Marcus. Every accusation, every rumor, every piece of filth they've spread about her for 5 years, lies. You sound very certain of that. I am certain. Rowan drained his champagne in one swallow, the crystal stem creaking under his grip. I knew her. I knew him. And I know exactly what kind of man Richard Whitmont was. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, the kind who dies suddenly at 35, you mean? Rowan's jaw clenched. The kind who would rather destroy the woman he married than admit he'd chosen wrong. Careful, old friend. Marcus's voice dropped. That sounds dangerously close to an accusation, and the Whitmont family still has considerable influence. Let them try to use it. Rowan set down his glass with enough force to crack it. I've spent 5 years watching them destroy her reputation while I did nothing. That ends tonight. Rowan. Marcus gripped his shoulder. Think about what you're saying. Your position, your responsibilities, mean nothing if I don't use them for something that matters. Rowan shook off his hand. She's back, Marcus. After 5 years of silence, she's back. And this time, I'm not letting her face them alone. Even if it ruins you? Especially if it ruins me. Rowan's smile was sharp as broken glass. Because she's already been ruined once for something she didn't do. It's time someone else paid the price. Across the room, hidden in the shadows of an alcove, Lady Genevieve Harrington watched this exchange with narrowed eyes. Beside her, an older woman in purple silk, the Dowager Countess of Bellingham, made a soft, thoughtful sound. "Interesting," the Dowager murmured. "The Duke has finally shown his hand." "After 5 years of perfect restraint," Genevieve agreed bitterly. "One night. She's back one night, and he's ready to throw everything away for her." "Not everything, my dear." The Dowager's smile was calculating, "but certainly enough to make things difficult for all of us." Genevieve turned to her fully. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Duke Ashford is the most influential bachelor in England. His support could rehabilitate her reputation. His opposition could destroy ours." The Dowager tapped one bejeweled finger against her lips. "We need to ensure he understands exactly what kind of woman he's defending." "She's already been tried and convicted in the court of public opinion," Genevieve pointed out. "What more can we do?" "Oh, my dear child." The Dowager's laugh was soft and terrible. "Public opinion is just the beginning. If the Duke wants to make this a war—" Her eyes glittered in the candlelight. "Then we'll give him one he can't possibly win." The music swelled, the party continued. And in a dozen different corners of the exhibition hall, a dozen different conversations began, each one a small piece of the machine that would either destroy Elara Whitmont completely or prove that some women were too strong to break. The morning after the exhibition arrived with all the subtlety of a public execution. Elara woke to find 3 scandal sheets shoved under her door, each one screaming variations of the same story. The Black Widow returns. Duke Ashford's dangerous fascination. Murderous among us, society's darkest secret resurfaces. She read them over cold tea in her sparse breakfast room, her expression never changing. The townhouse she'd rented was serviceable at best, narrow walls, creaking floors, furniture that had seen better decades. Nothing like the mansion she'd once called home. The estate her husband had promised would be hers forever. Forever had lasted exactly 3 years. Mrs. Calloway, her only servant, a stern Scottish woman who'd followed her from the countryside out of loyalty rather than wages, set down a plate of toast with more force than necessary. "Vultures!" the older woman spat. "Every last one of them. Should be ashamed printing such filth." Elara folded the papers carefully. "They're just doing what vultures do, Mrs. Calloway, feeding on carrion." "You're not carrion, my lady. You're alive, breathing, and innocent of every foul thing they've accused you of." "Innocence is irrelevant." Elara took a sip of tea, grimacing at the bitterness. "Perception is what matters. And right now I'm perceived as exactly what these papers say I am." A sharp knock at the front door interrupted them. Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed. "If that's another reporter, I'll handle it." Elara stood smoothing down her simple morning dress. Navy blue, high-necked, severe, armor of a different sort. She opened the door to find a liveried footman holding a silver tray. On it sat a single calling card, cream-colored and edged in gold. "Duke Rowan Ashford requests the honor of your company for a morning ride in Hyde Park. 11 o'clock. The footman's face was carefully blank, but Elara could see the curiosity burning in his eyes. Every servant in London would know about this within the hour. By afternoon, it would be in every drawing room. By evening, the scandal sheets would have a field day. "Tell His Grace," Elara said clearly, "that I decline." The footman blinked. "My lady?" "You heard me correctly." She handed back the card. "Tell him I decline his invitation, and I would appreciate it if he would refrain from sending further correspondence." "But—" The footman struggled visibly. "His Grace was most insistent that I wait for your acceptance." "Then His Grace will be disappointed." Elara began to close the door. "He's waiting outside." She froze. "What?" The footman gestured toward the street, where a magnificent black stallion stood beside an equally magnificent carriage. And standing next to both, looking every inch the aristocratic duke in riding clothes that probably cost more than her entire townhouse, was Rowan Ashford. Their eyes met across the narrow street. Elara's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Tell His Grace." "Tell me yourself." Rowan was already moving, crossing the cobblestones with long, purposeful strides. The footman wisely retreated. You shouldn't be here, Elara said the moment he reached her doorstep. Do you have any idea what this looks like? I know exactly what it looks like. Rowan stopped at the bottom of the steps, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. It looks like a duke calling on a lady. Perfectly acceptable social behavior. Not when the lady is me. Especially when the lady is you. His jaw was set, that stubborn line she remembered too well. I meant what I said last night, Elara. I'm not walking away from you again. You don't have a choice. She was acutely aware of curtains twitching in neighboring windows, faces pressed to glass, servants lingering on stoops. Rowan, please. You're only making this worse. For whom? He moved up one step. For you? Or for the people who've built their reputations on destroying yours? For you! The words burst out before she could stop them. For you, you stubborn, impossible man. Do you think I want to watch you throw away everything you've built? Everything you are? Because that's what will happen if you keep this up. They'll destroy you too. Let them try. He climbed another step, and now they were almost at eye level. I've spent 5 years playing by their rules, Elara. 5 years being the perfect duke, the perfect peer, making the perfect decisions for the perfect reasons. And you know what it's gotten me? Power, influence, respect, nothing. The word was raw. It's gotten me nothing that matters. Nothing real. Nothing worth... He stopped, breathed. I'm done playing their game. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. He was close enough now that she could see the storm gray of his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. Come riding with me. 1 hour. That's all I'm asking. 1 hour will ruin us both. Then we'll be ruined together. His smile was sharp, dangerous. Please, Elara, don't make me beg on your doorstep. The neighbors are already getting quite the show. She wanted to say no, should have said no. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at her to close the door, send him away, protect him from the consequences of his own reckless nobility. But she was so tired of being alone. 1 hour, she heard herself say, and then you leave me alone. Something flickered in his expression. Triumph, perhaps, or relief. 1 hour, he agreed. 20 minutes later, they were cantering through Hyde Park, and Elara was remembering why she'd once loved mornings like this. The crisp air, the thunder of hooves, the sense of movement and freedom that came from letting a powerful horse have its head. Rowan had brought a mare for her, a beautiful bay with gentle eyes and a smooth gait. Not the spirited thoroughbred she'd once owned, but thoughtfully chosen nonetheless. It made her chest ache. They rode in silence for a while, following the wide paths through the park. It was early enough that society hadn't yet emerged for their fashionable afternoon promenade, but late enough that they weren't alone. Nannies with children, early riders, morning walkers, all turned to stare as they passed. The Duke and the widow. What a picture they made. You've improved, Rowan said finally. Your seat is better than I remember. 5 years in the countryside, Elara replied. There wasn't much else to do besides ride. Tell me about it, the countryside. Why? Because I want to know. He glanced at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. I want to know where you were, what you did, how you survived. I want to know everything I missed. You missed nothing worth knowing. She urged the mare faster, as if she could outrun the conversation. It was quiet, lonely, exactly what I deserved. That's not true. Isn't it? She pulled the mare to a stop near the Serpentine, the water glittering in the morning sun. Rowan halted beside her. You don't know what happened, Rowan. You weren't there. Then tell me. He dismounted smoothly, then came to help her down. His hands on her waist were firm, steady, and when her feet touched the ground, he didn't immediately let go. Tell me what happened the night Richard died. She stepped back, breaking the contact. I can't. Can't or won't. Does it matter? She turned toward the water, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth of the morning. The story is already written. Society has decided what happened. Nothing I say will change that. It will change what I believe. And why should that matter to me? She spun to face him. Why should I care what you believe when you... She stopped, bit back the words. When I what? Rowan's voice was quiet, dangerous. Say it, Elara. When I what? When you weren't there. The dam broke, and years of buried rage came flooding out. When Richard was courting me, when his family was pressuring me, when I needed someone to... She choked on the words. You weren't there. You were in Scotland or France or wherever dukes go to avoid unpleasant situations. And by the time you came back, I was already engaged. I didn't know. His face had gone pale. Elara, I swear to you, I didn't know he was... Of course you didn't know. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because you never asked. You saw the announcement, sent a polite congratulations, and that was that. The perfect gentleman, the perfect friend. What else could I have done? His hands clenched at his sides. You were engaged to another man. What right did I have to eat? You had every right, the words tore out of her. You had the right of knowing me, of caring about me, of seeing that something was wrong, but you were too busy being proper, being appropriate, being the Duke of Bloody Ashford to notice that I was drowning. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Rowan stared at her, and she watched realization break across his face like dawn. You wanted me to stop it. I wanted you to fight for me. Her voice broke. Just once, I wanted you to break your precious rules and fight for me. But you didn't. And so I married him. Elara, don't. She held up a hand. Don't apologize. Don't explain. It doesn't matter anymore. That was 5 years ago. A different life. It matters to me. He took a step closer. If I had known, if I had understood. You would have what? Challenged him to a duel? Created a scandal? She shook her head. You would have done nothing, Rowan, because that's what dukes do. They follow rules. They maintain order. They sacrifice personal feeling for social good. I would have married you myself. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and devastating. Elara's breath caught. No. Yes. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides. If I had known you wanted me to fight for you, I would have. If I had known that engagement was anything other than your choice, I would have burned London to the ground to stop it. Don't say that. Her voice was barely a whisper. Don't rewrite history because you feel guilty. I'm not rewriting anything. I'm telling you the truth. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek, but not quite touching. I was in love with you, Elara. I have been since the summer you turned 20, and we spent 3 weeks at my family's estate arguing about poetry and philosophy. I was in love with you, and I thought you were too far above me to ever want... Too far above you? She stared at him. You're a duke. And you're brilliant. The words were fierce. You're brilliant and brave and sharper than any woman I've ever met. You could quote Aristotle and shoot better than my best gamekeeper and make me laugh until I couldn't breathe. You were everything, Elara. Everything I wanted and everything I thought I could never have. Tears burned in her eyes. Then why didn't you say something? Because I was a coward. His hand finally made contact, his palm cupping her cheek with devastating gentleness. Because I convinced myself you deserved better than a man who spent half his time managing estates and the other half in Parliament. Because I was young and stupid, and by the time I realized what I'd lost, you were already married. A single tear slipped down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb. I went to your wedding, he said softly. Did you know that? We stood in the back of the church and watched you marry him, and it took everything I had not to object when the vicar asked if anyone had reason why you shouldn't wed. Rowan, let me finish. His other hand came up, framing her face. I watched you marry him, and I told myself it was for the best, that you'd chosen him, that you'd be happy, that I needed to let you go. And then 3 years later, he died, and everything fell apart, and you disappeared before I could... He stopped, swallowed hard. Before I could tell you that I was sorry, that I should have fought, that I should have been brave enough to risk everything for the chance to be with you. Elara closed her eyes against the onslaught of emotion. It's too late. Is it? His forehead rested against hers. Because I'm here now, and you're here. And maybe we can't change the past, but we can decide what happens next. What happens next is you walk away. She opened her eyes, met his gaze, You walk away before they destroy you too. They can try. His smile was sharp. But I'm a duke, remember? I have resources, power, and I'm very, very good at playing their game when I choose to. This isn't a game, Rowan. This is my life. Then let me help you take it back. He pulled away just enough to look at her properly. Let me stand with you, fight with you. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Why? The question was barely a breath. Why risk everything for me? Because 5 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go. His thumb stroked across her cheekbone. I'm not making it again. Before she could respond, a sharp voice cut through the moment like a blade. Well, how touching. They sprang apart. Standing 10 feet away, mounted on a pristine white mare, was Lady Genevieve Harrington, and behind her a small riding party, Lord and Lady Pembroke, the Dowager Countess of Bellingham, and at least 3 other members of society's most vicious inner circle. All watching, all calculating. Your Grace! Genevieve's smile was poisonous. What an unexpected encounter. We were just riding by when we saw you and Lady Whitmont engaged in what appeared to be quite an intimate conversation. Rowan's expression went cold. Lady Harrington. One wonders, Genevieve continued, her voice carrying across the water, what the papers will make of this. The Duke of Ashford, one of England's most eligible bachelors, alone with a woman accused of murdering her husband. In a public park, no less. How very scandalous. There is no scandal, Rowan said flatly. Lady Whitmont and I are old friends. I invited her riding, that's all. Is it? The Dowager Countess urged her horse forward, her eyes glittering with malice. Because, from where I'm standing, it looked like considerably more than friendship. Then perhaps you need spectacles, Countess. Rowan's voice could have frozen fire. Perhaps. The Dowager's smile was thin. Or perhaps I see exactly what I'm meant to see. A duke, infatuated with a woman of questionable character, a woman who brings nothing but scandal and shame to everyone she touches. Mind your words, Rowan warned. Why should I? The Dowager's voice hardened. Everyone in London knows what she is, what she did. And now you're dragging your name, your title, your family's reputation into the mud for her. Your mother must be turning in her grave. My mother, Rowan said with lethal calm, would have defended an innocent woman against baseless accusations, as I am doing now. Innocent? Lady Pembroke's shrill voice joined the attack. Her husband died under mysterious circumstances. Heart failure, Elara said quietly. Every eye turned to her. Richard died of heart failure brought on by years of excessive drinking and untreated illness. The physician's report was clear. Was it? Genevieve's eyebrow arched. Strange, then, that his family claims otherwise, that they've been quite vocal about their suspicions regarding the circumstances of his death. His family, Elara said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, wanted his estate. They wanted his money. And when the will left everything to me instead of his brother, they decided to destroy my reputation rather than accept the terms. How convenient, the Dowager's tone dripped sarcasm. The poor widow, maligned by greedy relatives. Tell me, Lady Whitmont, if you're so innocent, why did you flee London? Why hide in the countryside for 5 years if you had nothing to be ashamed of? Because I was grieving. Elara lifted her chin. And because I knew that people like you would never let truth stand in the way of a good scandal. Insolent girl, that's enough. Rowan's voice cracked like a whip. All of you, this conversation is over. Is it? Genevieve's smile turned vicious. Or is it just beginning? After all, the whole of London will hear about this by evening. The Duke of Ashford, openly consorting with a suspected murderess. I wonder what the other peers will think, what Parliament will say. They'll think, Rowan said coldly, that I choose my own companions, and they'll say nothing because I outrank every last one of them. Rank isn't everything, Your Grace. The Dowager's eyes narrowed. Reputation matters, influence matters, and right now you're throwing both away for a woman who isn't worth the scandal. Rowan moved. In 3 strides, he was at the Dowager's horse, his hand on the bridle, his face a mask of controlled fury. Listen to me very carefully. he said, his voice soft and absolutely terrifying. I will say this once and only once. Lady Whitmont is under my protection. Anyone who slanders her, gossips about her, or attempts to damage her reputation further will answer to me personally. Is that clear? The Dowager paled. Your Grace, I hardly think... Is that clear? Silence. Then, stiffly, crystal clear, Your Grace. Good. Rowan released the bridle and stepped back. Now leave, all of you, before I decide to make this truly unpleasant. They left in a flurry of offended muttering and backward glances, Genevieve shooting one last venomous look at Elara before spurring her mare away. And then they were alone again. Elara was shaking. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces together. That, she said quietly, was a declaration of war. Yes. Rowan came to stand beside her. It was. They'll destroy you now. You realize that? They'll use every tool they have, call in every favor, spread every rumor. Let them. His hand found hers, warm and solid. I meant every word I said. You shouldn't have. She looked up at him, and the fear in her eyes was raw. You shouldn't have put yourself between me and them. Now they'll come for you too. Then they'll find out what happens when they threaten something I care about. His fingers tightened around hers. I'm not afraid of them, Elara. And you shouldn't be either. I'm not afraid for me. Her voice broke. I'm afraid for you. He pulled her close, and this time she didn't resist. She let herself lean into his strength, let herself feel, just for a moment, what it was like to not carry everything alone. We're going to fight this, he murmured into her hair. Together. And we're going to win. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that love and truth could triumph over power and lies. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. And as they stood there by the Serpentine, holding on to each other while the morning sun climbed higher, and London woke to the scandal that would consume them both, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just stepped off a cliff. The only question now was whether they'd learn to fly, or whether the fall would destroy them both. The scandal sheets hit the streets before noon. By 2 o'clock, every drawing room in Mayfair was ablaze with it. By 4, the gentlemen's clubs were placing bets on how long before the Duke of Ashford came to his senses. By 6, 3 separate dinner invitations to Elara had been rescinded, and a formal petition was being drafted to the House of Lords questioning Rowan's judgment and fitness for his seat. Elara learned all of this from Mrs. Calloway, who'd spent the afternoon making discreet inquiries at the markets and servants' halls. The older woman set down a cup of tea with trembling hands. They're saying terrible things, my lady, worse than before. They're saying you've bewitched him, that you're using dark arts, or... She stopped, her weathered face flushing. Or my body, Elara finished calmly. Yes, I imagine they are. It's obscene. You're a respectable widow, and the Duke is a grown man capable of making his own choices. Respectability is a luxury I lost the night Richard died. Elara stared into her teacup, watching the steam curl and dissipate. And Rowan's choices are precisely what they're questioning. A duke consorting with a suspected murderess? It challenges the natural order, makes them nervous. Then they're fools. They're survivors. Elara looked up, and her expression was bleak. Just like me. They'll do whatever it takes to protect their position, their power, their place in the hierarchy, even if it means destroying someone who threatens it. A sharp knock interrupted them. Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed. If that's another bloody reporter, I'll handle it. But when Elara opened the door, she found not a reporter, but a young messenger boy holding a sealed letter. The wax bore the Ashford crest. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Elara, come to Ashford House tonight, 8 o'clock. There are things you need to know about Richard's death. Things I've uncovered, trust me. R. She read it 3 times, her heart hammering. Things about Richard's death? What could Rowan possibly have found after 5 years? Mrs. Calloway peered over her shoulder. Are you going? Elara folded the letter carefully. I have to. It could be a trap. Not from his grace, the older woman added quickly, but from those vipers circling him. They could be using him to get to you. Then I'll spring the trap. Elara moved toward the narrow stairs. Because if there's even a chance that Rowan has found something, anything, that could prove what really happened, I have to know. And if he hasn't, if this is just hope? Elara paused, one hand on the banister. Then at least I'll have seen him one last time before I disappear again. My lady, I can't let him destroy himself for me, Mrs. Calloway. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. If tonight goes badly, I'll leave London. Go somewhere they can't find me. Let the scandal die with my absence. That's not fair. No, Elara agreed softly. But it's survival. She dressed carefully for the evening, not in mourning black this time, but deep emerald silk that brought out the color of her eyes. A deliberate choice. If this was to be her last appearance in Rowan's life, let him remember her as she'd been before Richard, before the scandal, before everything turned to ash. Mrs. Calloway braided her dark hair into an elegant coronet, her fingers gentle despite her disapproval. You look like a queen going to battle. Perhaps I am. Elara met her own eyes in the mirror. Perhaps we all are. The hired carriage took her through darkening London streets to Mayfair's most exclusive address. Ashford House rose like a fortress, 4 stories of perfect Georgian architecture, windows blazing with light, the kind of ancestral wealth that made even other aristocrats feel inadequate. The butler who answered the door was ancient and impeccably proper. He showed no surprise at her arrival, merely bowed and murmured, "His Grace is expecting you, my lady." The library. The library, of course. Where else would Rowan choose to have this conversation but surrounded by books and history and the weight of centuries? She followed the butler through marble halls lined with portraits of Ashford ancestors, stern men and elegant women who'd ruled this house, this family, this corner of England for generations. Their painted eyes seemed to follow her, judging, assessing, finding her wanting. The library door opened and Rowan stood from where he'd been pacing before the fireplace. He looked exhausted, still impeccably dressed in evening clothes, but his hair was disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "You came." Relief flooded his voice. "You asked." Elara stepped inside, heard the door close softly behind her. "What have you found?" No preamble, no pleasantries. They were past that now. Rowan crossed to a massive desk and retrieved a leather portfolio. "I spent the afternoon with my solicitor and a very expensive investigator. I had them pull every document related to Richard's death, physicians' reports, witness statements, financial records from the months before he died." Elara's breath caught. "Why?" "Because I needed to know the truth." He opened the portfolio, spreading papers across the desk. "And because I suspected that what society believes and what actually happened are 2 very different things." She moved closer, scanning the documents. Medical reports, testimonies, financial ledgers. Her hands clenched at her sides. "Richard was dying," Rowan said quietly, "long before that final night. His physician noted severe heart disease, liver damage from excessive drinking, symptoms of untreated syphilis." "Stop." Elara closed her eyes. "I know what he was, what he had." "Did society know? Did his family?" "His family knew." Bitterness crept into her voice. "They knew everything. That's why they pushed so hard for the marriage. They needed a respectable wife to hide his indiscretions, and they needed an heir before he deteriorated too far. But there was no heir. No." The word was barely a whisper. There was no heir. Richard was incapable, had been for months before he died. But his family blamed me, said I was barren, cold, unwilling to perform my wifely duties. Rowan's jaw clenched. The truth? The truth is that he was violent when drunk, which was nearly always. The truth is that he blamed me for his failures and took out his frustration with his fists. She looked at Rowan directly. The truth is that the night he died, we had an argument about his latest mistress, a 16-year-old girl from the village he'd been grooming. I told him I'd expose him if he touched her. He struck me. I struck back, and his heart gave out. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. Rowan's face had gone white. He hit you. Frequently. And you never told anyone? Who would I tell? Elara's laugh was hollow. His family? They knew and didn't care. Mine? Dead or distant. Society? They would have said I deserved it, that I must have provoked him, that it was a wife's duty to endure. You could have told me. Could I? She met his eyes. What would you have done, Rowan? Challenged a married man to a duel? Created a scandal that would have destroyed us both? Or would you have done what every other respectable gentleman would do, advised me to be a better wife and turned away? He flinched as if she'd slapped him. I want to say I would have helped. But truthfully, I don't know. The man I was 5 years ago, he shook his head. I'm not sure he was brave enough. And the man you are now? The man I am now would burn the world down to keep you safe. He turned back to the documents, which is why I need to show you this. He pulled out a thick sheaf of papers bound with legal ribbon. Richard's will. The original, not the copy his family circulated. My investigator found it in the archives of your late husband's solicitor. Elara's hands trembled as she took it. The words swam before her eyes, legal language dense and impenetrable. I don't understand. I've seen the will. It left everything to me. The estate, the investments, the London house. It did. Rowan pointed to a specific clause. But there's more. A codicil added 3 weeks before his death. One his family never mentioned. She read where he indicated, and the breath left her lungs. In the event of my death under circumstances deemed suspicious or unnatural, all assets shall revert to my brother, Harold Whitmont, provided he can demonstrate reasonable cause to suspect wrongdoing on the part of my widow. They planned it, she whispered. They planned to accuse me from the beginning. Not planned, prepared. Rowan's voice was grim. Richard must have known he was dying. His physician had probably warned him, so he and his brother created an insurance policy. If they could paint you as a murderess, Harold would inherit everything. But the physician's report said natural causes. The physician's report that was made public, yes. But look at this. Rowan pulled out another document. This is the original report, filed the morning after Richard's death. It mentions bruising on Richard's chest consistent with a physical altercation. It mentions elevated alcohol levels and previous heart damage. But it also mentions, he pointed to a line, that given the deceased's known violent tendencies and history of domestic disputes, the altercation appeared defensive in nature. Elara's vision blurred. The physician believed me. The physician documented the truth. But 3 days later, a revised report was filed, one that omitted the defensive nature of your actions and emphasized the physical altercation. The same day Harold Whitmont paid the physician a substantial sum for consulting fees. He bought a lie. Rage, hot and clarifying, burned through Elara's shock. Harold paid to make me look like a murderer so he could take the inheritance. Yes, and for 5 years it worked. Rowan gathered the papers carefully. Until now. She looked up at him, hope and fear warring in her chest. What are you going to do with this? I'm going to expose them. His expression was iron. Every lie, every manipulation, every piece of evidence they buried. I'm going to take this to the courts, to the papers, to every lord in Parliament if I have to. And I'm going to make sure the truth comes out. They'll fight back. Elara's hands clenched on the will. Harold still has influence. The family has money, connections. So do I. Rowan stepped closer. And unlike them, I'm willing to use every weapon in my arsenal. Even if it destroys your reputation? My reputation is already in tatters, thanks to this morning spectacle. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. But yours can be restored. You can have your life back, Elara. Your name, your freedom. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so desperately it hurt. What if it's not enough, she whispered. What if we expose Harold, prove the codicil was fraud, reveal the physician's lie, and society still chooses not to believe it? What if they've invested so much in the story of the wicked widow that they refuse to let it go? Then we make them let it go. Rowan took her hands, the papers crumpling between them. Tomorrow night, there's a ball at the Bellingham estate, the season's largest event. Every important family in London will be there. I wasn't invited. You are now, as my guest. His eyes burned into hers. I'm going to stand before every person who's slandered you, every family who's profited from your ruin, and I'm going to present this evidence publicly, undeniably, and I'm going to dare them, to call you a murderess after they've seen the truth. Elara's heart stopped. That's insane. That's war. His grip tightened. You said they destroyed you because you had no one to fight for you. Now you do. Now you have me. And I promise you, Elara, I will not let them win. Rowan? Her voice broke. If you do this, there's no going back. You'll be choosing me over everything. Your standing in Parliament, your relationships with other peers, your future. My future is standing right in front of me. He raised her hands to his lips, pressed a fierce kiss to her knuckles. And I choose you. I will always choose you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You're going to regret this. Never. The word was a vow. The only thing I regret is not fighting for you 5 years ago. I won't make that mistake again. She pulled one hand free, cupped his face. You beautiful, reckless, impossible man. You're going to get us both killed. Or we'll survive. He turned his head, kissed her palm. Together. She pulled him down and kissed him, hard, desperate. 5 years of longing and rage and love poured into the pressure of lips and tongue and breath. He made a sound low in his throat, his arms coming around her, crushing her against his chest as if he could fuse them together through sheer force of will. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elara rested her forehead against his. Tomorrow night, she whispered. We end this. Tomorrow night, he agreed. We burn it all down. But neither of them knew that tomorrow night the real fire was already being lit. The next evening arrived with ominous speed. Elara spent the day in a state of controlled terror, alternating between reading and rereading Rowan's evidence and staring blankly at her wardrobe, trying to choose armor for the battle ahead. In the end, she chose blood red. A gown of crimson silk that moved like liquid fire, with a neckline just daring enough to be memorable, and a train that swept behind her like a challenge. She wore her mother's pearls again, and diamond pins that caught the light like tiny stars. Mrs. Calloway braided her hair into an intricate crown, weaving in black ribbons. You look like a warrior queen. I feel like a condemned woman walking to the gallows. Elara's hands trembled as she fastened her earrings, then walked proudly. The older woman squeezed her shoulders. And remember, you're innocent. No matter what they've said, no matter what they believe, you're innocent. Innocence doesn't matter in their world. Only power. Then take yours back. The carriage Rowan sent for her was magnificent. The Ashford crest blazoned on its doors, footmen in full livery, every detail calculated to announce to London that the Duke was making a statement. When they arrived at Bellingham House, the street was clogged with carriages, the mansion ablaze with light. Music drifted from open windows, and the cream of society climbed the steps in their finest silks and jewels. Elara's carriage stopped at the entrance. The footman opened the door, and she realized Rowan was waiting for her at the top of the steps. He stood alone, magnificent in black evening clothes, his expression unreadable. As she climbed toward him, every conversation on the steps died. Every eye turned. When she reached him, he offered his arm. Ready? No. She took it anyway. But let's do it anyway. They walked into the ballroom together, and the world stopped. The Bellingham ballroom was legendary, soaring ceilings painted with classical frescoes, crystal chandeliers the size of carriages, walls lined with gilt mirrors that multiplied the crowd into infinity. Easily 300 people filled the space, and every single one of them turned to stare. The orchestra faltered mid-note. The whispers started like a wave, building from murmur to roar. Audacity! Her, here! What is he thinking? The Dowager Countess of Bellingham, resplendent in purple and diamonds, materialized before them like an avenging angel. Your Grace, what is the meaning of this? Good evening, Countess, Rowan's voice carried across the sudden silence. Allow me to present my guest, Lady Elara Whitmont. Your guest. The Dowager's eyes were chips of ice. You bring a woman of her reputation to my home, to this gathering? I bring an innocent woman who has been grievously slandered. Rowan's tone was pleasant, but steel underneath. And I bring evidence that will prove her innocence to anyone willing to hear the truth. Evidence? Lord Pembroke pushed forward, his face florid with drink and outrage. What evidence could possibly excuse the evidence that her late husband's family conspired to frame her for murder in order to steal her inheritance? Rowan's words cut through the room like a blade. The evidence that Harold Whitmont bribed a physician to alter a death report. The evidence that Richard Whitmont was a violent drunk who died of his own failings after attacking his wife. The silence was absolute. Then chaos erupted. Lies. How dare you? Say, proof. We demand proof. Gladly. Rowan raised a hand and the room quieted. I have with me the original physician's report detailing Richard Whitmont's history of violence and the defensive nature of Lady Whitmont's actions. I have the fraudulent codicil to his will, designed to disinherit her if his family could manufacture a scandal. I have financial records showing Harold Whitmont's payments to the physician and to several members of the press to spread rumors about his brother's death. He pulled the portfolio from inside his coat, held it high. Every document here is genuine, verified by my solicitors, and available for inspection. The truth is this: Elara Whitmont is innocent. She has always been innocent, and the real criminals are those who destroyed her reputation to cover their own greed. For a moment, nothing. Just 300 people, frozen in shock. Then a new voice cut through the silence. Cold, aristocratic, deadly. You lying bastard! Harold Whitmont stood near the ballroom entrance, his face purple with rage. Beside him, Lady Genevieve Harrington and a cluster of his supporters formed a small army. Those documents are forgeries, Harold snarled. Fabrications created by a duke so besotted with a beautiful face that he'll destroy his own credibility to protect her. They're not forgeries, Rowan's voice was ice. And you know it. I know that my brother married a scheming woman who killed him for his money. Harold started forward, and the crowd parted before him like water. I know that she spent 3 years bleeding his estate dry, entertaining God knows how many lovers. That's a lie. Elara's voice rang out, clear and strong. I was faithful to your brother, despite his cruelty, despite his violence, despite everything he put me through. And when he died, you saw an opportunity to take what was rightfully mine. Rightfully yours? Harold's laugh was vicious. You were nothing when he married you, a merchant's daughter with delusions of grandeur. He gave you everything, title, position, wealth, and you repaid him with poison and betrayal. I repaid him with loyalty he didn't deserve. Elara stepped forward, breaking from Rowan's side. I endured his abuse, his infidelity, his lies. I stayed silent when he brought his mistresses into our home. I said nothing when he struck me hard enough to crack ribs. I protected your family's reputation, even as you were planning to destroy mine. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several women pressed hands to their mouths. You're insane, Harold spat. My brother was a gentleman. Your brother was a monster. Elara's voice cracked like a whip. And you knew it. You all knew it. His parents knew he was sick, knew he was violent, knew he was dying. That's why they married him off so quickly, to a woman with no family to protect her, no connections to cause trouble. I was supposed to be the perfect victim, silent, compliant, easily discarded. She turned, addressing the room. But I'm not silent anymore. I'm not compliant. And I will not be discarded. The truth is that Richard Whitmont died because his heart finally gave out under the weight of his own sins. And the tragedy is that even in death, he's still destroying lives, mine, and now the Duke's because he dared to defend me. Pretty speech. Genevieve stepped forward, her smile cruel. But words mean nothing without proof, and all I see is a desperate woman and a foolish duke clinging to forged documents. Then examine them yourself. Rowan thrust the portfolio at her. Every document, every signature. Bring in your own experts. Test the paper, the ink, the seals. You'll find they're all genuine. Genevieve didn't take the portfolio. Or we could simply ask the physician himself. Her smile widened. Dr. Thornberry, would you step forward, please? An elderly man in formal dress emerged from the crowd. Elara's blood turned to ice. Dr. Thornberry, the physician who'd examined Richard's body, the one Harold had bribed. Dr. Thornberry, Genevieve purred. You examined Richard Whitmont the night he died, did you not? I did, my lady. His voice was thin, nervous. And did your original report mention anything about defensive wounds, about violence, about Lady Whitmont acting in self-defense? The physician's eyes darted to Harold, then away. No, my lady. My report stated that Mr. Whitmont died of heart failure following a physical altercation. There was no mention of self-defense. Elara's world tilted. That's not true. You told me. You said you understood. I said, the physician interrupted, his voice gaining strength, that I would record the facts as I observed them, which I did. Mr. Whitmont died of heart failure. There was evidence of a recent altercation. Those are facts. But the bruising, the pattern, you said it was defensive. I said nothing of the kind. The physician's face was stone. I'm sorry, Lady Whitmont, but you appear to be confused about that night. I'm not confused. Elara's voice rose, panic clawing at her throat. You know what happened. You were there. You saw. I saw a man dead and a wife with blood on her hands. The physician looked at the crowd, not at her. I reported what I observed. Nothing more. You're lying. Elara lunged forward, but Rowan caught her. You're lying because he paid you, because Harold Whitmont bought your silence. Careful, Lady Whitmont. Harold's smile was poisonous. Accusing a respected physician of bribery without evidence is slander, and we have laws about that. Rowan's grip on Elara tightened. The financial records are circumstantial at best, Harold interrupted. I paid Dr. Thornberry consulting fees for his services, perfectly legal, perfectly normal. The fact that you've twisted that into some conspiracy theory speaks more to your desperation than to any actual wrongdoing. The crowd murmured, and Elara heard the shift, doubt, suspicion, the tide turning against them. What about the codicil? Rowan demanded. The clause about suspicious circumstances, that proves you were planning to disinherit her from the start. That proves my brother was wise enough to protect his assets. Harold's voice grew confident. He knew the kind of woman he'd married. He took precautions that proved justified when she killed him. I didn't kill him, Elara screamed. The words echoed in the suddenly silent ballroom. I didn't kill him. I just wanted him to stop hurting me, to stop destroying me. And when I finally fought back, his heart gave out and she stopped, realized what she'd just said. The horror on the faces around her confirmed it. She admits it. Genevieve's voice was triumphant. She admits there was a physical altercation, that she fought him, that her actions contributed to his death. In self-defense, Rowan's voice was desperate now. She was protecting herself from an abusive husband, or she was a violent woman who killed her husband in a fit of rage. Harold moved closer, circling them like a shark. Tell me, Lady Whitmont, when you struck my brother, did you know his heart was weak? Did you know that the blow might kill him? Elara's voice failed, because the answer was yes. She'd known Richard was sick, known his heart was failing, and in that final moment, when she'd shoved him away as hard as she could, she'd known there was a chance. She knew, Harold said softly. She knew, and she did it anyway. That's not self-defense, Your Grace. That's murder. The room erupted, voices overlapping, accusations flying, the careful social order collapsing into chaos. And through it all, Rowan stood frozen, staring at Elara with an expression she couldn't read. Rowan, she reached for him. You have to believe me. I didn't mean, I never wanted. The Duke of Ashford has been deceived. The Dowager Countess's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Clearly, Lady Whitmont has manipulated him with lies and false evidence. I move that she be removed from this gathering immediately and that formal charges of fraud and defamation be brought against her. Seconded! Multiple voices, eager for blood. No! Rowan stepped forward. You don't understand. We understand perfectly, Your Grace. Lord Pembroke's tone was almost pitying. You've been taken in by a beautiful, manipulative woman. It happens to the best of men. But this has gone far enough. Two footmen moved toward Elara. She backed away, her heart hammering. This was it. The moment she'd feared. The trap closing. All of Rowan's evidence, all his courage, all his defiance, meaningless against the weight of society's judgment and her own terrible admission. Wait. The voice was quiet but cut through the chaos like a bell. Everyone turned. A young woman stood near the ballroom entrance, perhaps 19, pale and trembling, dressed in simple gray. Elara recognized her with a jolt. Sarah, the village girl Richard had been grooming, the one Elara had tried to protect. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "About Mr. Richard Whitmont, and what he did to me." The silence that fell was absolute. Harold's face went white. "Sarah, don't... He hurt me." Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. "For months he came to our cottage, made promises, said he'd take care of me, give me money, a better life. And then he..." Her voice broke. "He forced himself on me. Multiple times. And when I threatened to tell, he said no one would believe a merchant's daughter over a gentleman, that I'd be ruined if I spoke up." Gasps. Horrified whispers. "But Lady Whitmont believed me." Sarah looked directly at Elara, tears streaming down her face. "She found out what he was doing. She confronted him. And the night he died, she wasn't protecting herself." Sarah's voice rang out clear and strong. "She was protecting me, because he'd threatened to have my family destroyed if she told anyone. So she told him instead that if he touched me again, she'd expose everything. And that's when he attacked her." The ballroom exploded. Harold lunged for Sarah, but Rowan was faster, intercepting him with a grip that made the older man cry out. "Let her speak," Rowan snarled. "She's lying. My brother would never..." "Your brother was a predator." Sarah's voice was steel now. "And everyone knew it. Everyone. But no one stopped him because he was wealthy, entitled, and powerful. Not until Lady Whitmont." She turned to the crowd. "She saved me. She saved my sister, and at least 3 other girls we know of. She stood up to him when no one else would. And you destroyed her for it." The silence was deafening. Elara couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at this brave, broken girl who'd just thrown herself into the fire to save her. The Dowager Countess's face was ashen. This is unconscionable. If what you say is true, it is true." Another voice. A woman in her 30s stepped forward. "Richard Whitmont assaulted me when I was in service at the estate. I never spoke up because I knew what would happen, but I'm speaking now." "And me." Another woman, then another, then 2 more. 5 women, standing in the center of London's most exclusive ballroom, testifying to the crimes of a dead man who could no longer hurt them. Harold Whitmont stood in the center of it all, his face the color of old paper, his carefully constructed lies crumbling to ash around him. Rowan released him, turned to the crowd. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, deadly. "Still think she's a murderess?" No one answered. "I said..." His voice rose. "Do you still think Elara Whitmont is a murderess? Or do you finally see what I've seen all along, that she's a survivor, a protector, a woman who sacrificed everything, her reputation, her safety, her future, to save people who couldn't save themselves?" He turned to Elara, and the look in his eyes shattered her. "And I am proud," he said clearly, "to stand beside her." He dropped to one knee. The crowd gasped. "Elara Whitmont," Rowan said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are the bravest person I've ever known. You're brilliant and fierce and more noble than every person in this room combined. And I love you. I have loved you for years, and I will love you for every day I have left." He pulled a small box from his pocket, opened it to reveal a diamond ring that caught the light like captured stars. "Marry me. Not to restore your reputation, or to defy society, or to prove a point. Marry me because I cannot imagine a life without you in it. Marry me because you're my future, my hope, my everything." Elara stared down at him, at this impossible man who just staked everything on her, and felt the armor she'd built for 5 years finally completely shatter. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes." He stood, slid the ring onto her finger, and kissed her in front of 300 witnesses who'd come to watch her burn. And in that moment, as London's elite stood in stunned silence, as Harold Whitmont was quietly escorted out by authorities someone had the presence of mind to summon, as 5 brave women wept in each other's arms, Elara Whitmont finally felt free. The kiss broke, and Elara found herself staring into Rowan's eyes while the ballroom held its collective breath. The ring on her finger felt impossibly heavy, impossibly real, a physical anchor to a future she'd stopped believing in years ago. Then the Dowager Countess of Bellingham began to clap, slowly at first, measured, deliberate strikes of gloved palm against palm. Then others joined. Lord Pembroke's wife, several younger ladies near the back, Marcus Thorne, Rowan's friend, grinning like a fool as he applauded with enough force to make his hands red. The applause built like a wave, spreading through the crowd until the ballroom thundered with it. Not everyone participated. Lady Genevieve stood frozen, her face a mask of fury, and at least 24 others remained pointedly silent, their expressions ranging from disapproval to outright disgust. But enough joined in. Enough that the tide had shifted. Rowan kept his arm around Elara's waist, anchoring her as the noise washed over them. She felt dizzy, unmoored, as if the ground beneath her feet had transformed into something unstable. "Breathe," Rowan murmured against her ear. "You're safe. I have you." But Sarah's testimony had opened a door that couldn't be closed. As the applause died down, more women stepped forward, not just those who'd been Richard's victims, but others who'd witnessed his cruelty, his manipulations, the carefully hidden violence of a man society had protected because of his name and wealth. An older woman in black silk spoke of finding bruises on her lady's maid after Richard visited their estate. A young mother described how her sister had fled London rather than accept Richard's courtship. A kitchen servant talked about screams she'd heard from the Whitmont townhouse, screams everyone pretended not to notice. Each testimony was a stone thrown at the edifice of lies Harold Whitmont had built, and with each one, Harold's remaining supporters looked more uncomfortable, more uncertain, more likely to abandon him to save themselves. Finally, the Dowager Countess raised a hand, and silence fell again. "This is deeply troubling," she said, her voice tight. "If even half of what we've heard tonight is true, Richard Whitmont was not the gentleman we believed him to be. And if that's the case," she turned to Elara, and something in her expression had softened, "then Lady Whitmont may have endured far more than any woman should have to bear." "May have?" Rowan's voice was sharp. "With respect, Countess, we've just heard testimony from a dozen witnesses. How much more evidence do you need?" "Evidence is not the same as proof, Your Grace." The Dowager's eyes hardened. "And while I'm inclined to believe these women, the law requires more than inclination. Harold Whitmont may be guilty of covering up his brother's sins, but that doesn't automatically exonerate Lady Whitmont of what?" Elara's voice cut through the room like a blade. She pulled away from Rowan, stepped forward, her crimson gown sweeping behind her. "Of defending myself? Of protecting innocent girls from a predator? Of surviving 3 years of hell and having the audacity to live through it?" The Dowager's mouth thinned. "Of causing the death of your husband, Lady Whitmont. Regardless of his character, the fact remains that you admitted to a physical altercation that resulted in his death. That is, at minimum, manslaughter." "Then arrest me." Elara lifted her chin. "Right here, right now. Call the magistrate, bring charges, put me on trial. Because I'm done hiding. I'm done being silent. If society wants to punish me for refusing to let a monster destroy me and everyone around me, then let them try." The silence was absolute. Then a new voice spoke from the entrance. "That won't be necessary." Everyone turned. A tall man in magistrate's robes stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 constables. His expression was grave, his gray hair swept back from a face marked by decades of legal proceedings. "Magistrate Aldridge," the Dowager's voice held surprise. "I wasn't aware you were attending tonight." "I wasn't." Aldridge moved into the room, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before settling on Elara. "I was summoned by an urgent message regarding new evidence in the death of Richard Whitmont, evidence that required my immediate attention." Harold Whitmont, who'd been edging toward a side exit, froze. "What evidence?" "The testimony of Dr. Thornberry." Aldridge gestured, and the elderly physician was escorted forward by one of the constables. "Or rather, his actual testimony given under oath just this evening in my chambers." Dr. Thornberry looked ill, his face the color of old parchment. He wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. "Dr. Thornberry," Aldridge said quietly, "please repeat for this gathering what you told me less than an hour ago." The physician's hands trembled. I falsified the death report. Harold Whitmont paid me £500 to omit certain details and emphasize others. The original report clearly indicated that Richard Whitmont's death was the result of cardiac arrest brought on by years of drinking and disease, exacerbated by physical exertion during a violent altercation he initiated. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I also documented, the physician continued, his voice barely audible, extensive bruising on Lady Whitmont's arms, throat, and ribs consistent with defensive wounds. But Mr. Harold Whitmont threatened to ruin my practice if I included those details in the official report. He said society would believe what it wanted to believe, and he'd make sure they believed his brother was the victim. That's a lie! Harold's voice rose to a shout. He's lying! The Duke put him up to this, paid him to change his story. The Duke contacted me this afternoon with questions about discrepancies in the reports, Aldridge interrupted calmly. I conducted my own investigation. What I found was troubling enough to warrant bringing Dr. Thornberry in for formal questioning. Under oath, with the threat of perjury charges hanging over him, he confessed everything. The magistrate's gaze turned to Harold. Including your role in suppressing evidence and bribing witnesses. Harold's face went from white to purple. This is a conspiracy, a coordinated attack on my family's good name. Your family's good name? Sarah's voice shook with rage. Your brother raped me. He raped my sister. He destroyed lives and you covered it up. You don't have a good name. You have blood money and lies. She's a hysterical girl with delusions. She's one of at least 15 victims we've identified so far, Aldridge said flatly. And given the testimony we've heard tonight, I expect that number to rise. Mr. Whitmont, I'm placing you under arrest for bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to defraud. The constables moved forward. Harold backed away, his eyes wild. You can't do this. I'm a gentleman. My family has served this country for generations. Then your ancestors would be ashamed. Rowan's voice cut through Harold's protests like ice through water. You dishonored their name the moment you chose to protect a rapist and destroy an innocent woman to steal her inheritance. Harold's gaze swung to Rowan, filled with venom. This is your fault. You and your obsession with that woman. You've destroyed everything. My family, my reputation. No. Elara stepped between them, her voice calm and cold as winter. You destroyed yourself. You made the choice to lie, to bribe, to manipulate. You could have told the truth 5 years ago. You could have let me grieve in peace, but you chose greed over honor, and now you're paying the price. Harold lunged at her. Rowan moved faster, catching him by the throat and slamming him back against a marble column with enough force to rattle the paintings on the wall. Touch her, Rowan said softly, his face inches from Harold's, and I will break every bone in your body before the constables take you away. Am I clear? Harold wheezed, his face turning red. The constables pulled Rowan back, but the threat had been delivered. As they dragged Harold toward the door, he twisted back, his voice raw with fury. This isn't over. I have friends, influence. I'll appeal. I'll fight this until what? The Dowager Countess's voice stopped him cold. Until you've spent your family's remaining fortune on legal fees? Until every door in London is closed to you? Until your name becomes synonymous with corruption and cowardice? She stepped forward, her expression arctic. Let me make something very clear, Mr. Whitmont. You have no friends here. Not anymore. Whatever influence you possessed died the moment that magistrate walked through my door. If you're wise, you'll accept your punishment quietly and hope for leniency. Because if you continue to fight, we will ensure you lose everything. The "we" was unmistakable. Not just her, but the collective weight of everyone who'd just witnessed his downfall. Harold's shoulders sagged. As the constables led him away, his protests faded to bitter silence. The moment the door closed behind them, the ballroom erupted in conversation. Voices overlapping, theories flying, the social order frantically reorganizing itself around this new reality. Elara stood in the center of it, feeling strangely numb. 5 years. 5 years of exile, shame, and survival. And now, in a single night, it was over. Lady Whitmont. She turned. The Dowager Countess stood before her, and for the first time there was something approaching respect in her eyes. I owe you an apology, the older woman said quietly. We all do. We believed the worst of you without question, without investigation. We allowed a good woman's reputation to be destroyed because it was convenient, because it fit the narrative we wanted to believe. That was wrong. Elara's throat tightened. I appreciate that, Countess. Appreciation is not what I'm seeking. The Dowager's jaw set. I'm seeking to make amends, starting now. She turned to the crowd, raising her voice. Let it be known that Lady Elara Whitmont is under my personal protection. Anyone who speaks ill of her, who questions her character, or who treats her with anything less than the respect she deserves will answer to me. Is that understood? A chorus of agreement, some genuine, some grudging, but all compliance. The Dowager turned back to Elara. It's not enough. Nothing can undo 5 years of suffering, but it's a start. It's more than I expected. Elara's voice was thick with emotion. Thank you. The Dowager nodded once, then swept away to manage the chaos her ballroom had become. Rowan's hand found Elara's, threading their fingers together. Are you all right? She looked down at their joined hands, at the ring glittering on her finger, then up at his face. I don't know, I feel strange. Like I've been holding my breath for 5 years and suddenly remembered how to breathe. That's shock. His thumb stroked across her knuckles. Come with me. You need air. He led her through the crowd, which parted before them with a deference that felt surreal. They slipped through a side door onto a stone terrace overlooking the Bellingham Gardens. The night air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of roses and rain. Elara gripped the balustrade, her hands shaking now that no one was watching. That really happened, all of it. It's really over. The trial isn't over. Rowan stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Harold will fight, and there will be legal proceedings, testimonies, but the verdict is already in. She turned to face him. Society has decided I'm innocent. The magistrate has evidence. Harold is arrested. The truth is out. Her voice cracked. I'm free. You're free, Rowan agreed softly. Then, carefully, does that change your answer? She blinked. My answer? To my proposal. His expression was guarded, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen him. I asked you to marry me in front of 300 witnesses, but I asked you when you were trapped, when I was your only defense against a hostile crowd. Now that you're free, now that you have your life back. He swallowed hard. Do you still want to marry a man who let you suffer for 5 years before finding the courage to fight for you? Elara stared at him. This powerful, brilliant man who'd just upended London society for her, and he genuinely didn't know if she'd stay. You're an idiot, she said. He blinked. What? An idiot. She grabbed his lapels, pulled him down to her level. A brave, reckless, wonderful idiot who thinks I might leave after everything you've just done. She kissed him hard, pouring 5 years of longing and rage and love into the pressure of her lips against his. I meant yes the first time you asked. I mean yes now. I'll mean yes tomorrow and next week and 10 years from now. I'm not going anywhere. His arms came around her, crushing her against his chest. Thank God, because I don't think I could survive losing you again. You won't have to. She rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in sandalwood and safety. We survived the worst they could throw at us. Everything else is going to be easy. He laughed, the sound rough and relieved. You clearly have more faith in London society than I do. No. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. I have faith in us. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other while music and conversation drifted from the ballroom beyond. The party was continuing, reshaping itself around the scandal and revelation, society doing what it did best, adapting to survive. We should go back inside, Rowan said finally. Make appearances. Show them we're united. In a minute. Elara wasn't ready to face the crowd again, wasn't ready to perform gratitude and grace when she still felt raw and exposed. Tell me something first. Anything. When did you know? She traced the line of his jaw with one finger. When did you know you'd fight for me no matter the cost? Rowan was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes distant. The night of the exhibition, when you walked into that hall in that black dress looking like vengeance itself, and I realized that 5 years hadn't dimmed you, hadn't broken you. You were still the woman I'd fallen in love with, just sharper now, harder, forged in fire. His hand cupped her cheek, and I knew that if I let you walk away again, if I let them destroy you without fighting back, I'd never forgive myself. So I decided right then, I was going to war, and I wasn't stopping until you were safe. Tears burned in Elara's eyes. You could have died on that hill. Better to die fighting for something real than live safely with regret. His smile was crooked. Besides, I didn't die. We won. Did we? She glanced back toward the ballroom. Harold is arrested, yes. But how many people in there still believe the worst of me? How many will smile to my face and whisper behind my back? How long before another scandal surfaces and I'm forgotten, or worse, remembered only as that woman who caused all that trouble? Then we'll fight that too. Rowan's expression hardened. Every whisper, every slight, every attempt to diminish what you survived, we'll face it together, and eventually they'll give up because we won't. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that love and truth were enough to overcome years of ingrained prejudice and social inertia. A discreet cough from the terrace doorway interrupted them. Marcus Thorne stood there, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Apologies for the intrusion," he said, "but Rowan, you're needed inside. Several of the older peers want to speak with you about—" He glanced at Elara. "About the implications of tonight's revelations." Rowan's jaw clenched. "Tell them I'm occupied." "I don't think that's wise," Marcus's voice dropped. "They're talking about Harold's trial, about the precedent it sets. Some are concerned about their own indiscretions coming to light. They want assurances." "Assurances?" Rowan's voice went cold. "What kind of assurances?" "That this won't become a pattern, that women won't suddenly feel empowered to speak up about—" Marcus stopped at the look on Rowan's face. "Their words. Not mine. I'm just the messenger." "Then tell them," Rowan said softly, dangerously, "that if they're worried about women speaking up, perhaps they should examine their own behavior, because I won't be party to silencing victims to protect powerful men's reputations." Marcus grimaced. "That's what I thought you'd say. Which is why I'm warning you. They're organizing. Pembroke, Harrington, at least 6 others. They see tonight as a threat to the established order, and they're planning to push back." Elara's blood chilled. "How?" "They're going to argue that Elara's testimony was coerced, that the women who spoke up were paid or manipulated, that Harold's arrest was politically motivated, a duke using his influence to persecute a rival." Marcus looked miserable. "They're going to turn this into a power struggle, you versus them, and they're going to make sure everyone knows the stakes." "Let them." Rowan's voice was iron. "I'm not backing down." "I know." Marcus sighed. "Which is why I'm telling you to be smart about this. Don't confront them directly tonight. Let tempers cool. Build your coalition, because you'll need allies for the fight ahead. The Dowager is on your side now, and several others. But you need more." "He's right," Elara said quietly. Rowan looked at her in surprise. "They're scared. Scared men are dangerous. If you push too hard tonight, they'll entrench. But if you give them time to realize how many people support us, how much evidence we have, how badly they'll look if they defend Harold—" She squeezed his hand. "Sometimes retreat is the better strategy." Rowan's expression was torn between fury and admiration. "You're asking me to walk back in there and play nice with men who want to destroy you. I'm asking you to be strategic." She rose on her toes, kissed him softly. "We won the battle tonight, but the war isn't over, and I need you to fight smart, not just hard." He closed his eyes, breathed out slowly. When he opened them again, the rage was banked, controlled. "All right, we do this your way. For now." They returned to the ballroom together, and Elara felt the shift in atmosphere immediately. The crowd had separated into factions, those who supported them, those who opposed them, and a larger group still calculating which side would benefit them most. The Dowager Countess appeared at their side almost immediately. "Lord Pembroke and his associates are holding court near the west wall," she murmured, spreading doubts about the validity of tonight's testimonies. "I've been countering where I can, but they have influence." "What are they saying?" Elara asked. "That Dr. Thornbury was threatened into confession, that the women who spoke up were coached, that Harold was arrested without proper investigation. The dowager's mouth thinned. None of it will hold up to scrutiny, but they don't need it to. They just need to plant enough doubt that people question what they saw. Then we don't give them time to plant doubt. Rowan's voice was calm but steel underneath. We go on the offensive. Tomorrow, I'm calling a meeting of the House of Lords. I'll present all the evidence publicly, demand a formal investigation into Richard's crimes and Harold's cover-up. Make it official, legal, undeniable. That's risky, Marcus warned. You'll be painting a target on your back. The target's already there. Rowan looked at Elara. But she's right. We need allies. Countess, who among the peers can we count on? The dowager considered. Lord Ashworth, Lady Catherine Melbourne, the Duke of Somerset, though he'll want something in return. Lord Blackwood, if you can convince him it's in his financial interest. She paused. And surprisingly, Lady Genevieve's father. He was furious when he learned she'd been working with Harold to destroy Lady Whitmont. Apparently he has 3 daughters, and the thought of them being vulnerable to men like Richard disturbed him deeply. Elara felt a flicker of hope. That's a start? It's more than a start. The dowager's smile was sharp. It's a coalition, and with the right pressure we can expand it. She glanced around the ballroom. I suggest we begin tonight. Quiet conversations, strategic alliances. By tomorrow morning, I want half of London society on our side. And the other half, Rowan asked, will fall in line or be left behind. The dowager's eyes glittered. Social pressure works both ways, Your Grace. Those who supported Harold will find themselves increasingly isolated, invitations withdrawn, business partnerships dissolved, marriages for their children suddenly difficult to arrange. They'll reconsider their positions quickly enough. It was ruthless, calculated. Exactly the kind of warfare Elara had watched destroy her 5 years ago. But this time, she wasn't the target. She was the weapon. Do it, she said quietly. The dowager nodded and swept away, already intercepting a cluster of influential ladies near the refreshment table. For the next 2 hours, Elara and Rowan moved through the ballroom like opposing generals at a peace negotiation. Every conversation was strategic, every smile calculated. They separated, working different groups. Rowan focusing on the older male peers, Elara on the women and younger generation. She found Sarah sitting alone near a window, looking overwhelmed. The girl's hands were shaking, her eyes red from crying. Sarah, Elara sat beside her. Are you all right? I don't know. Sarah's voice was small. I thought I'd feel better after telling the truth, after everyone knowing what he did, but I just feel exposed. Like everyone's looking at me and seeing a survivor, Elara finished firmly. They're seeing a survivor, someone brave enough to speak truth to power, even when it was terrifying. I was so scared. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. I almost didn't come tonight, but then I thought about you, about how you tried to protect me, and I couldn't let you face them alone. Elara's throat tightened. You saved me tonight. You know that? Without your testimony, they might have twisted everything, but you gave them truth they couldn't deny. Did I? Sarah looked toward the crowd where several people were openly staring. Some of them still look at me like I'm lying, like I'm trying to ruin a good man's name. Then they're fools. Elara took Sarah's hand, and we'll prove them wrong, together, because you're not alone in this anymore. You have me. You have the Duke. You have everyone who spoke up tonight, and we're going to make sure you're protected. What if Harold gets out of this? What if he comes after me? He won't. Rowan's voice came from behind them. He'd approached silently, his expression gentle as he looked at Sarah. I give you my word, Miss Sarah. Harold Whitmont will spend the rest of his life paying for his crimes, and you will be safe. I'll see to it personally. Sarah's eyes went wide. Your Grace, I'm nobody, just a merchant's daughter. You don't have to eat. You're not nobody. Rowan's voice was firm. You're a woman who risked everything to tell the truth. That makes you braver than half the titled lords in this room. And it means you have my protection, my resources, and my gratitude. The girl burst into tears. Elara held her while she sobbed, and over her head met Rowan's eyes. This is why I love you, she mouthed. His answering smile was soft, warm, nothing like the cold duke's mask he wore for society. By midnight, the ballroom had thinned considerably. Those who opposed them had left early, taking their whispers and schemes elsewhere. Those who remained were largely supporters, or at least neutral parties willing to see how events unfolded. The Dowager Countess found them near the entrance, looking satisfied. "I've secured commitments from 12 families, promises of support in Parliament, social backing, and cooperation with any official investigations. It's not a majority, but it's significant." "It's a miracle," Elara breathed. "It's strategy." The Dowager's smile was calculating. "Most of them support you because it's in their interest now. Harold's arrest changes everything. No one wants to be on the wrong side of a corruption scandal. They're protecting themselves as much as you." "I'll take it." Rowan offered his arm to Elara. "Shall we?" They descended the steps to find a crowd had gathered on the street. Not the hostile mob Elara had feared, but a mixed group of onlookers, curious, supportive, some carrying hastily made signs supporting victims of violence. Word had spread, beyond the ballroom, beyond Mayfair, into the streets of London where ordinary people lived and worked and suffered in silence. A woman in a simple cotton dress pushed through the crowd, middle-aged, work-worn hands, but her eyes were fierce. "Lady Whitmont, is it true? Did you really stand up to them?" Elara froze. Rowan's hand tightened on her arm. Her voice failed. "It's true," Rowan said clearly. "Lady Whitmont survived years of abuse and fought to protect others from the same fate. She's a hero." "Then thank you," the woman's voice cracked. "My sister's husband beats her. Everyone knows, no one does anything. Maybe now things will change." Other voices joined in. Stories of violence ignored. Abuse hidden. Women suffering in silence because society demanded it. Elara felt tears streaming down her face. These weren't London's elite. These were ordinary people who'd heard about tonight and seen for the first time that someone fought back and won. "Things will change," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I promise you, if nothing else comes from tonight, let it be this. You're not alone, and you don't have to be silent anymore." The crowd erupted in cheers. It wasn't polite applause like in the ballroom. This was raw, genuine, the sound of hope breaking through despair. As their carriage pulled away, Elara looked back at the crowd, at Sarah standing with the other women who'd spoken up, at the Dowager Countess watching from her doorway with an expression that might have been approval. "We did it," she whispered. "We started it," Rowan corrected. "Tomorrow, we finish it." She leaned against him, exhausted and exhilarated and terrified of what came next. But for the first time in 5 years, she felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. The war wasn't over, but they'd won the first real victory, and that was enough. The war wasn't over, but they'd won the first real victory, and that was enough. The words echoed in Elara's mind as the carriage carried them through London's darkened streets. Rowan sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her sleeve. Neither spoke. The silence between them was comfortable, heavy with exhaustion and relief, and the weight of what they'd just survived. When they reached her modest townhouse in Bloomsbury, Rowan didn't let her go. "I'm not leaving you here," he said quietly. "Not tonight. Rowan, the scandal is already so massive that one more impropriety won't matter." His smile was tired but genuine. "Besides, we're engaged. Society will have to adjust to the idea that I intend to spend time with my future wife." Mrs. Calloway opened the door before Elara could respond, her eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "My lady, I heard. Is it true? Is Harold Whitmont really arrested?" "It's true." Elara stepped inside, suddenly grateful for the shabby warmth of the narrow hallway. Everything came out tonight. The truth about Richard, about Harold's lies, all of it. The older woman's face crumpled. She pulled Elara into a fierce embrace that smelled of lavender and kitchen soap. "Thank the stars. Thank every star in the sky. I knew this day would come. I knew they couldn't keep burying the truth forever." When she finally released Elara, she noticed Rowan standing in the doorway. Her eyes widened. "Your Grace! Forgive me, I didn't realize. Would you like tea or something stronger?" Something stronger, I think. Rowan stepped inside, and the small house seemed to shrink around his aristocratic presence. It's been quite an evening. Mrs. Calloway bustled away to find whatever spirits she had hidden in the pantry, leaving Elara and Rowan alone in the cramped sitting room. The furniture was worn, the rug faded, nothing like the grandeur of Ashford House or even the modest elegance Elara had once known. "I'm sorry," she found herself saying. "This isn't what you're accustomed to." Rowan looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Do you know what I see when I look at this place?" She shook her head. "Survival." He moved to her, took both her hands. "I see a woman who lost everything and built something from nothing, who lived here for months with dignity and courage while the world tried to break her. This house isn't shabby, Elara. It's a fortress, and you should be proud of it." The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. He pulled her close, and she wept against his chest, 5 years of grief and rage and loneliness pouring out in great, shuddering sobs. "I thought I'd lost everything," she whispered when she could speak again. "My name, my future, any chance at happiness. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life hiding, alone, defined by one terrible night forever." "You're not alone." His arms tightened. "You'll never be alone again. I swear it." They stayed like that until Mrs. Calloway returned with brandy and tactfully retreated to give them privacy. Then they sat together on the worn sofa, drinking in silence, too exhausted for words but too wired to sleep. "What happens tomorrow?" Elara asked finally. "Tomorrow, we go to war." Rowan set down his glass. "I'll call a session of Parliament, present the evidence publicly, force them to acknowledge what Richard was and what Harold did. They'll fight it. Let them." His jaw set. "I have magistrates, physicians' reports, witness testimony, and financial records. They can fight all they want. The truth is on our side. Truth doesn't always win. It does when it's backed by power." He looked at her. "And make no mistake, I will use every ounce of power I have to ensure justice." She believed him. This wasn't the cautious Duke who'd let her marry Richard without protest. This was a man who'd chosen his hill and would defend it to his last breath. "I'm going to start a foundation," she said suddenly. The words surprised her as much as they surprised him. "For women like Sarah, women who've been hurt, who have nowhere to go, no way to escape. I'll use whatever inheritance I get from Richard's estate, if I get it back after the legal proceedings, to create safe houses, legal aid, medical care." Rowan stared at her. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "That's brilliant. And I'll match whatever funds you have. Double them. We'll make it substantial enough that it can help hundreds, thousands of women. The scandal will be worth it." He took her hand. "Elara, we have a chance to do something extraordinary here. Not just clear your name, but change the system that allowed Richard to hurt so many people. We can build something that lasts beyond this moment, beyond our lifetimes." Hope flared in her chest, bright and dangerous. "You really think we can?" "I know we can." His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "Because we're not fighting alone anymore. Tonight proved that. When those women stood up, when Sarah spoke, that was the beginning of something bigger than us. A movement. A change. Or a backlash." Elara's pragmatism reasserted itself. "Pembroke and his allies won't give up without a fight. They'll see this as a threat to their power, their control. They'll come after us with everything they have. Then we'll be ready." Rowan's expression hardened. "I've spent years playing by their rules, being the perfect Duke. It's gotten me nothing but loneliness and regret. I'm done with that. From now on, I make my own rules, and anyone who doesn't like it can go to hell." She'd never heard him speak like this, raw, defiant, stripped of aristocratic polish. It should have frightened her. Instead, it made her love him more. "When did you become so reckless?" she asked softly. "The moment I saw you walk into that exhibition hall." His smile was crooked. "You ruined me for cautious living, Elara Whitmont." "Good." She leaned in, kissed him with all the pent-up longing of 5 years apart. Cautious living is overrated anyway. They didn't sleep that night. Instead, they planned. Strategies for Parliament, names of potential allies, legal arguments for restoring Elara's inheritance. By the time dawn broke over London, they had the skeleton of a campaign that would either change society or destroy them both. Elara was betting on change. The House of Lords convened 3 days later, and the chamber was packed. Word had spread about Rowan's intention to present evidence regarding Harold Whitmont's arrest, and every peer who could make it to London had shown up, eager to witness either vindication or catastrophe. Elara watched from the gallery reserved for ladies, her hands clenched in her lap. She wore deep blue today. Not quite mourning, not quite celebratory. The Dowager Countess sat beside her, along with Lady Catherine Melbourne and a handful of other women who'd declared their support. Below, in the main chamber, Rowan stood before the assembly like a general addressing his troops. He'd dressed simply, no excessive finery, just the formal robes of his office and the Ashford ducal coronet. The message was clear. This wasn't performance. This was duty. "My lords," he began, and the chamber quieted. "I come before you today to present evidence regarding a matter of justice that has been neglected for 5 years, a matter that touches on the honor of this body, the integrity of our legal system, and the safety of the vulnerable in our society." He gestured, and his solicitor brought forward a trunk filled with documents. "These are the records of Richard Whitmont's death and the subsequent persecution of his widow. They include falsified physician reports, bribed testimonies, suppressed evidence, and fraudulent legal documents designed to steal an inheritance and destroy an innocent woman's reputation." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several lords shifted uncomfortably. Lord Pembroke rose, his face florid. "Your Grace, with all due respect, this chamber is not a courtroom. We cannot—" "You are correct, Lord Pembroke. This is not a courtroom." Rowan's voice cut like ice. "It is something far more important. The highest legislative body in England. And when corruption has infected our judicial system, when powerful families can bribe physicians and magistrates to persecute innocent women, it is our duty to address it." "Alleged corruption," another lord interjected, "based on documents that may themselves be fraudulent." "Are you suggesting I'm lying?" Rowan's tone went deadly quiet. "Because I assure you, my lord, every document here has been verified by independent experts. Every signature authenticated, every claim corroborated by multiple witnesses. If you doubt that, you are welcome to conduct your own investigation. In fact, I encourage it." The silence was absolute. "But while you investigate," Rowan continued, "I will tell you what these documents reveal. Richard Whitmont was a serial rapist who preyed on vulnerable young women for years. His family knew and covered it up. When he died, of natural causes exacerbated by his own violent behavior, his brother Harold saw an opportunity to steal his widow's inheritance by painting her as a murderess. He bribed Dr. Thornberry to alter the death report. He paid scandal sheets to spread rumors. He used this chamber's own prejudices against women to destroy an innocent life." "This is outrageous." A gray-haired peer near the back stood. "You're making accusations against a respected family based on the testimony of 15 women Richard assaulted." Rowan's voice rose. "Based on financial records showing Harold's bribes. Based on Dr. Thornberry's sworn confession given to Magistrate Aldridge 3 days ago. Based on evidence so overwhelming that Harold Whitmont is currently awaiting trial for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice." He paused, letting that sink in. "But this isn't just about Harold Whitmont. This is about a system that allowed him to succeed. A society that automatically believed the worst of a woman rather than question a man's character. A legal framework that offers no protection to victims of powerful men's crimes." "Your Grace," an older duke, Somerset, stood. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we establish a formal inquiry into Richard Whitmont's crimes and the cover-up that followed. I'm proposing we pass legislation making it easier for victims of violence to seek legal redress. And I'm proposing we create a fund, backed by the Crown and wealthy peers, to provide aid, shelter, and legal support to women who've been similarly victimized." The chamber erupted. Half the lords shouting support, half in outraged opposition, all of them talking over each other in a cacophony that made the speaker pound his gavel uselessly. In the gallery, the Dowager Countess leaned close to Elara. "He's magnificent." "He's insane," Elara whispered back. "He's asking them to fundamentally change how society works." "Yes." The Dowager's smile was sharp. and half of them are terrified he might succeed. It took 20 minutes for order to be restored. When it was, Lord Pembroke was on his feet, his face the color of raw beef. Your Grace, you speak of legislation and reform as if we can simply rewrite centuries of law and custom because you've developed a fascination with a particular lady. But the reality is that marriage and family matters are private. We cannot legislate morality, we cannot criminalize every domestic dispute, and we certainly cannot allow women to weaponize accusations to destroy men's reputations. Weaponize? Rowan's voice was dangerously soft. Lord Pembroke, are you suggesting that the 15 women Richard Whitmont raped are lying? That they've coordinated false testimony to destroy a dead man's reputation? I'm suggesting that women are emotional creatures prone to exaggeration, and I'm going to stop you right there. Rowan descended from the speaker's platform, walking directly toward Pembroke. Because if you finish that sentence, I'm going to demand satisfaction. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Challenging another peer to a duel over a point of honor was technically illegal but still occasionally practiced among the nobility. Pembroke paled. Your Grace, surely you don't mean... I mean every word. Rowan stopped 5 feet from him. You just suggested that multiple victims of sexual violence are liars. That is slander. It is also an insult to every woman in this country. So either retract your statement or meet me at dawn with your second. The chamber held its breath. Pembroke looked around desperately, seeking support. But the other lords who'd been nodding along moments before suddenly found their shoes fascinating. I may have spoken hastily, Pembroke muttered. I didn't hear you. Rowan's voice carried to every corner of the room. Louder, please. I retract my statement. Pembroke's face was purple now. I spoke without full knowledge of the facts. I apologize. Accepted. Rowan turned back to the chamber. Now, shall we vote on establishing the inquiry? All in favor? The vote was closer than Elara would have liked, 43 in favor, 38 against, with several abstentions. But it passed. As the chamber dissolved into argument about next steps, Rowan looked up at the gallery. His eyes found Elara's across the crowded space. She mouthed 2 words, I'm proud. His answering smile could have lit the entire city. The inquiry took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of testimony from victims, examination of evidence, legal arguments from both sides. Harold Whitmont's solicitors fought viciously, but the evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Thornbury's confession alone was damning, but combined with the financial records, the witness testimony, and the pattern of Richard's behavior, it painted an undeniable picture of conspiracy and corruption. During those 6 weeks, Elara and Rowan became a fixture in London society, no longer as duke and scandalous widow, but as engaged couple and reformers. They attended dinners and balls, not to seek approval but to build coalitions. They met with magistrates and solicitors, physicians and scholars, anyone who might help shape the legislation Rowan was drafting. And they met with the women. Sarah and the others who'd spoken up at the ball had become something of a movement. More victims came forward, not just of Richard, but of other men like him. Women who'd been silent for years found courage in numbers. Elara rented a building near Covent Garden, nothing fancy, but functional, and opened the first safe house. She hired Mrs. Calloway as the manager and staffed it with women who understood trauma and survival. Within a week, it was full. We need more space, Mrs. Calloway reported one evening as Elara made her rounds. We've turned away 6 women this week alone. And the letters, my lady, you wouldn't believe the letters. Women from all over England asking for help. Elara felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. 1 house wouldn't be enough. 10 wouldn't be enough. The need was vast, the suffering widespread, but it was a start. We'll open another, she said, and another after that. As many as we need. With what funds, my lady? Mrs. Calloway's tone was gentle but practical. The Duke has been generous, but even his resources aren't limitless. Then we'll find more. Elara's jaw set. I'll write to every wealthy family in England if I have to. Shame them into contributing, make it socially unacceptable not to support the cause. Mrs. Calloway's smile was approving. You're learning to use their own weapons against them. I had a good teacher. Elara thought of the Dowager Countess, who'd been coaching her on the art of social manipulation. Besides, they owe these women. Society failed them. The least we can do is provide resources to help them rebuild. The final hearing of the inquiry happened on a gray October morning. The chamber was packed again, this time with press and public observers in addition to the peers. Magistrate Aldridge presided, his expression grave as he reviewed the findings. After 6 weeks of investigation, he began, this inquiry has concluded that Richard Whitmont was responsible for numerous acts of sexual violence over a period of at least 5 years. That his family, specifically his brother Harold Whitmont, was aware of these crimes and took active steps to conceal them. That Harold Whitmont did conspire to defraud his brother's widow of her rightful inheritance through bribery, falsification of documents, and slander. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Furthermore, this inquiry finds that the legal and social systems that enabled these crimes to continue unpunished represent a failure of our duty to protect the vulnerable. We recommend immediate legislative action to address these failures. Rowan stood. What of Lady Whitmont's inheritance? All assets seized from Lady Whitmont's control are to be restored immediately, Aldridge ruled. The estate, the investments, the London property, all of it. Additionally, Harold Whitmont is ordered to pay restitution for damages to her reputation and livelihood. Elara's breath caught. After 5 years, her inheritance, the money she'd been denied, the security stolen from her, was finally hers again. And Harold Whitmont's sentence? Another lord asked. Mr. Whitmont has been found guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice, Aldridge said. He is sentenced to 15 years imprisonment and forfeiture of all titles and properties associated with his brother's estate. Additionally, he is barred from ever holding public office or sitting in judgment of others. The chamber erupted in conversation. Up in the gallery, Elara sat frozen, unable to quite process that it was over. Truly over. The Dowager Countess squeezed her hand. You did it, my dear. You won. We won, Elara corrected softly. All of us. That evening, Rowan took her to Ashford House. Not as a visitor this time, but as his future wife. The staff assembled in the grand entrance hall, and he introduced her formally as the future Duchess of Ashford. She saw the calculation in some faces, the disapproval in others. But she also saw respect. These servants had watched their master risk everything for her. That meant something in their world. Welcome home, my lady, the ancient butler said, bowing deeply. Home. The word hit her like a physical blow. For 5 years she'd had no home. Just temporary lodgings, borrowed spaces, places to survive but never truly live. Now she had this, not just a house, but a home, a future, a life. Rowan led her through halls lined with generations of Ashford portraits to a private sitting room overlooking the gardens. Night had fallen, and the grounds were illuminated by hundreds of lanterns. I had them light the gardens, he said softly. I wanted you to see Ashford House at its best. It's beautiful. She moved to the window, watching light dance across perfectly manicured hedges and stone pathways. But Rowan, I need to know, are you certain about this? About me? Because once we're married, there's no going back. You'll be tied to my scandal, my past, my fight. Forever. I know. He came to stand behind her, his arms circling her waist. And I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Even knowing it will cost you politically? That there will always be lords who see you as the duke who threw away his dignity for a woman? Let them think what they want. His chin rested on top of her head. I'd rather be known as the duke who fought for justice than the one who stayed silent to preserve his reputation. And I'd rather spend my life married to a woman who challenges me, who makes me better, who faces the world with more courage than any soldier I've ever met. She turned in his arms, looked up at him. I love you. I don't think I've said that enough. I love you so much it terrifies me. Then let me terrify you for the rest of our lives. He kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. Marry me next week. She blinked. Next week? Rowan, we need to plan, prepare. There's protocol. Protocols can go to hell. His smile was reckless, bright. I've waited 5 years for this. I'm not waiting another 6 months for some elaborate society wedding. Next week. Small ceremony. Just us and the people who matter. Say yes. She should have said no, should have insisted on propriety, proper planning, time to breathe. But she'd spent 5 years being cautious, being careful, being afraid. Yes, she said. Next week. They married in the chapel at Ashford House on a crisp November morning. The guest list was deliberately small. Marcus Thorne as Rowan's witness, the Dowager Countess as Elara's, Mrs. Calloway weeping in the front row, Sarah and the other women from the safe house filling half the pews. No elaborate ball afterward, no grand celebration, just a simple breakfast with people who'd stood by them through the worst of it. But word spread anyway. By evening, all of London knew that the Duke of Ashford had married the former Lady Whitmont. The scandal sheets couldn't decide whether to praise him for his nobility or condemn him for his foolishness. Elara didn't care. She was too busy being happy. They honeymooned at Rowan's country estate, 2 weeks of peace away from London's chaos. 2 weeks to simply be together without the weight of scandal and reform and public scrutiny. On their last night before returning to the city, they walked through the grounds as twilight painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Are you ready?" Rowan asked. "Because London won't have gotten any easier while we were gone." "I know." Elara leaned into his side. "Pembroke and his allies are already organizing opposition to your legislative proposals. The scandal sheets are taking bets on how long our marriage lasts, and we have 3 more safe houses to open before winter." "Sounds like quite a challenge. Sounds like quite a fight." She smiled up at him. "Good thing I married a man who knows how to win them. We'll win them together." He stopped, turned to face her fully. "I have something for you." He pulled out a slim leather portfolio. Inside was a legal document, dense with official language. "What is this?" "The Foundation Charter. For the organization we discussed. Aid for victims, legal support, safe houses. I've endowed it with half my personal fortune. The Dowager has contributed substantially. So have Somerset, Blackwood, and surprisingly, Genevieve's father." Elara stared at the numbers, unable to quite comprehend the sum. This is enough to help thousands of women. That's the idea." His smile was soft. "I know you wanted to do this with Richard's inheritance, but I thought, why wait? Why not start building something now while we have momentum, while people are paying attention? You're giving away a fortune. I'm investing in the future." He cupped her face. "Our future. One where women like Sarah, like you, don't have to face monsters alone. Where there's actual recourse, actual help, actual justice." She kissed him then, there in the fading light, with the weight of that portfolio in her hands and the promise of tomorrow stretching before them. When they returned to London, they returned as partners, not just in marriage, but in purpose. The legislation Rowan had drafted passed the House of Lords by a narrow margin, despite fierce opposition. It wasn't everything they'd hoped for. There were compromises, weaknesses, loopholes, but it was a start. Women gained legal right to protection orders. Physicians were required to report suspicious deaths without fear of retaliation. Safe houses became officially sanctioned and eligible for public funding. Small victories. But they added up. The foundation grew. By the following spring, they had 7 safe houses operating across England. By summer, they'd hired solicitors who worked exclusively on behalf of victims. By autumn, they'd successfully prosecuted 3 men for violence against women, something that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. The opposition fought them at every turn. Pembroke organized a campaign against radical reform that threatens family values. Several scandal sheets ran vicious attacks on Elara, dredging up old rumors and inventing new ones. There were threats, anonymous letters promising violence if they didn't stop. They didn't stop. Instead, they doubled down. Rowan used his seat in Parliament to push for more protections. Elara used her growing influence to shame wealthy families into contributing to the cause. Together, they became a force that London society couldn't ignore. On the first anniversary of Harold Whitmont's conviction, Elara stood before a crowd of 200 women in their newly opened flagship facility, a proper building with medical care, legal offices, educational programs, and dormitories for those who needed sanctuary. "A year ago," she said, her voice carrying across the packed room, "I stood in a ballroom and faced people who wanted to destroy me, who'd spent 5 years calling me a murderess, a scandal, A woman who deserved to be ruined, and I thought that was my ending, the final chapter of a tragic story. She paused, looking at the faces before her. Women who'd survived what she'd survived. Women who'd fought their own battles against impossible odds. But it wasn't an ending, it was a beginning, because that night, women like Sarah found their voices. Women like all of you realized you weren't alone, and together we started to change the world. Applause erupted. Sarah, now working as an administrator for the foundation, stood and started a chant that spread through the crowd. Not alone, not silent, not anymore. Rowan watched from the back of the room, his expression one of pure pride. When Elara finished speaking and made her way through the crowd toward him, he pulled her into his arms. "You were magnificent," he murmured. "We were magnificent," she corrected. "This is our legacy, Rowan. Not just what we survived, but what we built from it." He kissed her temple. "I can't think of a better legacy." They left the building together as dusk settled over London. The city that had once tried to destroy them now held their greatest triumph. Not because they'd defeated every enemy or solved every problem, but because they'd proven that courage and truth and love could create real change. As their carriage rolled through familiar streets, Elara thought about the girl she'd been 5 years ago. Frightened, trapped, convinced her life was over. She thought about the widow who'd returned to London expecting nothing but more pain, and she looked at the woman she'd become, Duchess of Ashford, founder of an organization helping hundreds of women, wife to a man who'd risked everything for her, survivor who'd turned her tragedy into triumph. "What are you thinking?" Rowan asked. She smiled. "I'm thinking that sometimes the stories that start with 'once upon a time, there was a widow everyone hated' end with, 'and she changed the world.' Is that how this story ends?" "No." She took his hand, threading their fingers together. "This story doesn't end. It just keeps beginning, over and over, every time another woman finds her courage. Every time another victim becomes a survivor. Every time someone chooses to fight instead of surrender." "Then let's keep beginning," Rowan said softly. "Together." "Together," Elara agreed. And as London's lights began to glow in the gathering darkness, as the city transformed from hostile territory into home, as survivors across England found sanctuary in the houses they'd built, the widow who'd been broken became the Duchess, who'd rebuilt not just herself, but the world around her. Some legacies are measured in wealth or titles or power, but the truest legacies are measured in lives changed, in hope restored, in the courage to stand up and say, "No more." Elara Ashford's legacy was written in the faces of every woman who walked into a safe house and found protection instead of judgment, in every law that defended the vulnerable instead of the powerful, in every voice that spoke truth where silence had once reigned. She'd been called a murderess, a scandal, a woman who destroyed a good man. History would remember her differently, as the survivor who refused to stay broken, as the fighter who turned personal tragedy into public triumph, as the woman who proved that even in the harshest winter, even in the darkest night, spring could come. And with it, hope, rebirth, victory. Not just for her, but for every woman brave enough to stand up and fight back. That was the legacy worth leaving. That was the story worth telling. And it had only just begun.